She pointed her finger at me, her mother-in-law, in the middle of a packed restaurant and said the words, "I will never forget for the rest of my life. Sit over there. My parents are classy. You're not." I stood completely still. My son was right there, and he said nothing. That night I walked out of that restaurant quietly. No tears, no scene. But what happened next, what I did in the following 48 hours, changed everything they thought they knew about me. If you're watching this from Dallas, from Phoenix, from right there in your living room, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me. And if no one's told you today, subscribe, because this channel is for people who've earned their peace. I want to tell you something I've never told anyone out loud. The worst moment of my life didn't happen at a funeral. It didn't happen when my husband passed away 6 years ago, though God knows that nearly broke me in two. It didn't happen when the doctors gave me a diagnosis I wasn't ready for, or when I sat alone in a hospital waiting room with no one holding my hand. The worst moment of my life happened on a Friday evening in a beautiful restaurant surrounded by people laughing and clinking glasses, and it happened because of a woman who married my son. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 67 years old. I was married for 31 years to a good man named Robert, and when he died, I made myself a promise I would not become invisible. I would not shrink. I would live the rest of my life with my head held high. I thought I had kept that promise. Until that night. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of that dinner, the real beginning, because if you want to understand what happened at that restaurant, you have to understand what my life looked like before Amelia walked into it. Daniel was my only child. I raised him by myself for most of his teenage years after Robert's first health scare kept him from working. I worked double shifts at the accounting firm where I'd spent my career. I drove Daniel to baseball practice and math tutoring and later college visits. I sat in the parking lot of his first job interview and prayed out loud in the car while he was inside. When he got the job, he called me first. "Mom, I got it." I cried so hard I fogged up my glasses. I used to call me every single day, sometimes twice. Not long calls, just 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. "How's the garden? Mom, did you plant the tomatoes yet? Did you take your blood pressure medication?" Little calls, the kind that let you know someone is thinking about you. I lived for those calls. And then he met Amelia. I want to be fair because fairness matters to me. Amelia Worthington, that was her name before she became Amelia Collins, was a beautiful woman. Sharp dresser, sharp tongue. She had the kind of confidence that fills a room before she even speaks. She came from a family with money, the kind of money that announces itself without saying a word. Her father, Gerald Worthington, had built his fortune in commercial real estate. Her mother, Patricia, had never worked a day in her life and seemed vaguely offended by the idea that anyone else had to. When Daniel first brought Amelia home to meet me, I tried. I truly tried. I made her favorite meal she'd mentioned once casually, that she loved shrimp pasta, and I had the table set beautifully and the house as clean as it had ever been. I bought flowers for the centerpiece. I wore my nicest blouse. She walked in, looked around my home, the home I'd owned for 22 years, the home where I raised my son, and said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Oh, Margaret, this is cozy." Cozy. I smiled back. I let it go. That was the first time I let something go. It would not be the last. After the wedding, things shifted. Not dramatically at first, that's the thing about slow changes. You don't notice them until you're already deep in the current. Daniel's daily calls became every other day, then twice a week, then once a week, and only if I initiated. He stopped asking about the garden. He stopped asking about my health. When we did talk, there was always something hurried in his voice, like he was speaking to me from a room where someone was listening. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds need time. A man builds a new life with his wife. That is how it's supposed to be. I told myself that. But then came the requests. The first one was small. Daniel called and said they were a little tight that month. Could I help cover their car insurance just temporarily? Of course I said yes, because that is what mothers do. Then there was the phone plan. Amelia wanted to upgrade to a premium family plan, and it made more sense, Daniel said, if I was included and if I covered it since I was on it too. I was the least financially stretched, he said. I agreed. Then there was the extra credit card. Amelia needed one for emergencies, and since my credit score was excellent, would I mind being the primary account holder just for a short time, just until they got back on their feet? I said yes. I always said yes. Because I thought saying yes was how you showed love. But here is what no one tells you about always saying yes. People stop asking. They start assuming. They stop being grateful. They start being entitled. And somewhere along the way, you stop being their mother. You become their safety net, their backup plan, the quiet account they draw from when things get tight without ever stopping to ask how you're doing. I noticed it. Of course I noticed it. I am 67, not 6, but I stayed quiet. I told myself that one day Daniel would see it. One day he would step back and recognize everything I was doing, and he would turn to me with that face, that same face he had when he was a little boy, and he'd done something wrong and he knew it, and he would say, "Mom, I'm sorry, I see you." I waited for that moment for 3 years. It never came. And then the phone rang on a Friday afternoon, and my son's voice was bright and excited, and he said, "Mom, I want you to come to dinner tonight. Amelia's parents are in town, and we thought it would be great for everyone to finally spend time together." And like a fool, a hopeful, loving, desperate fool, I said yes. I spent over an hour getting ready, not because I cared what the Worthingtons thought of me. I want to make that clear. I stopped caring about impressing strangers sometime in my 50s, and I haven't looked back. I got dressed slowly and carefully because I wanted to respect the occasion. I wanted to show up as myself, fully, completely myself, and feel good doing it. I chose my dark navy dress. It was simple and well-fitted, and Robert used to say I looked elegant in it. I clasped the pearl necklace he gave me on our 20th anniversary around my throat. I did my hair the way I always do, neat, classic, nothing flashy. I looked in the mirror and I thought, this is who I am, and I am enough. I drove myself to the restaurant. Pearson's, that's what the place was called. It had only been open for about 8 months, but it had already become the most talked-about spot in downtown Charleston. Valet parking, a hostess in a cocktail dress, soft lighting that made everyone look like they were starring in a movie. I am not a woman who is easily intimidated by restaurants. I walked through the front door with my shoulders back. Daniel was waiting near the entrance, and I knew immediately that something was wrong, not because of anything dramatic. It was in the small things, the things you learn to read after 67 years of watching people. His hug was brief, one arm, barely a squeeze released before I even had time to hold on. His smile was the kind he makes when he's nervous. I know all his smiles. I've been cataloging them since he was 3 weeks old. "Mom, you look nice," he said. "Thank you, baby." I touched his arm. "You okay?" "Yeah, of course. Come on, they're at the table." He walked ahead of me, slightly ahead. Not beside me. I followed. The table was large and round-set near the back of the restaurant where the lighting was warmest and the noise from the bar didn't reach. It was a beautiful table, white linen, crystal glasses already filled with sparkling water, a small arrangement of white flowers in the center. Amelia was there. She looked stunning as she always did, deep red dress hair, swept up diamonds at her ears that probably cost more than my car. Beside her sat her parents. Gerald Worthington stood to shake my hand. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a handshake designed to remind you that he was important. "Margaret," he said, "good to finally meet you." "Likewise," I said warmly. "Daniel has spoken so highly of your family." Patricia Worthington didn't stand. She offered me a polite nod and the thinnest slice of a smile. Her eyes moved over me, my dress, my shoes, my necklace, in the way that some women have the quick assessment, the quiet verdict. I smiled at her anyway. I pulled back the empty chair beside Daniel. That's when Amelia stood up. I thought she was reaching for something, or getting up to greet me properly. In that half second, I still believed that. She stepped toward me and she positioned herself between me and the chair, and she leaned in close, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and she spoke quietly, not whispering, quietly, deliberately. "Margaret," she said, "I need you to sit somewhere else tonight." I stopped. "I'm sorry. There's a table near the front." She nodded toward the entrance, toward a small two-top near the hostess stand where people waited for their parties. "You'd be more comfortable there." I looked at her. I looked at the table she was pointing to. I looked back at her. "Amelia," I said slowly, "Daniel invited me to dinner. I'm here with my family." Her expression didn't change. Not one muscle moved. She had the kind of face that had been trained not to reveal discomfort. "My parents," she said, "are used to a certain kind of environment, a certain level of She paused, and in that pause, I felt something cold move through me. Sophistication. I think it would be better for everyone if you sat over there. I heard the words. I understood the words. But part of my brain refused to process them because what she was saying was impossible. What she was saying couldn't be real. Not here, not in front of my son. I turned to Daniel. He was looking at the menu. Not at me, not at his wife, at the menu. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the page like it held the answers to questions he couldn't face. "Daniel," I said. His name came out softer than I intended, smaller. He looked up. For one single second, his eyes met mine and I saw something there. Shame. Real shame. It was there, I know it was there. And then he looked away. "Mom," he said quietly. "Maybe just for tonight. Maybe just for tonight." I have replayed those 4 words more times than I can count. Maybe just for tonight. As if what his wife had said was a minor inconvenience, a seating preference, something that could be corrected later, smoothed over, explained away. Maybe just for tonight. My son told me without raising his voice, without making a scene, without any of the drama Amelia was so clearly afraid of, that I did not belong at his table. I looked at Amelia one more time. She had already turned back toward the table. She was saying something to her father, laughing at something he said, and her shoulders had relaxed, because the problem I was the problem had been handled. I looked at Gerald Worthington, who was pretending he hadn't heard any of it. I looked at Patricia Worthington, who was examining the menu with great concentration. I looked at my son, who would not look at me. And then I did something that even now I am proud of. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene or throw water in anyone's face or say the 17 things that were burning at the back of my throat. I straightened my spine. I picked up my purse, and I walked to the table by the door. The waiter who came to me was young, maybe 23, 24, with kind eyes, and the look of someone who had seen enough of the world to know when something wasn't right. "Good evening, ma'am," he said carefully. Will you be dining alone tonight?" "Yes," I said. "Just me." He hesitated. "Can I bring you a menu or—" "A bowl of soup," I said. "And hot tea, please. English breakfast if you have it." "Of course." He paused. "I'll get that right out for you." He walked away quickly. I think he was embarrassed for me, which was its own kind of small cruelty being seen in a moment like that by a stranger. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I had learned to do when Robert was in the hospital, and I needed to hold myself together for the sake of everyone around me. From where I sat, I could see their table. I could see Daniel laughing at something Gerald said. I could see Amelia refilling her wine glass and gesturing grandly as she told some story. I could see Patricia Worthington finally animate, smiling, nodding, fully present in the conversation. And I sat alone at my little table near the door, and every time someone came in from outside, a cold draft hit my shoulders. The soup came, French onion, rich and warm with melted cheese browning at the edges of the bowl. I ate it slowly, not because I was savoring it, but because I needed my hands to have something to do. I needed to focus on something small and manageable while my mind worked through what had just happened. Because something was working through me. Something quiet and important and completely new. Clarity. For the first time in 3 years, I was seeing things without the fog of hope distorting them. I saw my son clearly, not the little boy I had loved and sacrificed for. I still loved him, I would always love him, but the man he had become, a man who was so afraid of his wife's displeasure that he would sit silently while his mother was humiliated, a man who had chosen comfort over courage. I saw Amelia clearly, not the woman I had tried to befriend and welcome and win over, the woman she actually was, a woman who had looked at me, at my dress, my shoes, my entire self, and decided I was beneath her. Beneath her parents, beneath that table, and I saw myself clearly. A woman who had paid their bills and insured their car and funded their phone plan and said yes, 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 until yes had become so automatic that they'd forgotten I had the capacity to say anything else. I finished the soup. I set my spoon down. I reached into my purse and counted out enough cash to cover the soup and the tea and a generous tip for the young waiter with the kind eyes. I left it on the table. I stood up. I did not go back to their table to say goodbye. I did not catch Daniel's eye. I simply walked toward the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the cool Charleston evening. The air outside was clean in a way that the air inside had not been. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The valet glanced at me, uncertain whether I needed my car. "Yes, please," I said. "The gray Buick." While I waited, I looked up. It was a clear night, stars visible even through the downtown light pollution. Robert used to say you could always find at least 3 stars from anywhere in Charleston if you knew where to look. I found 4. When my car came, I tipped the valet, got in, and drove home. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, and I let myself feel every single thing I was feeling: the humiliation, the grief, the anger, the terrible hollow sadness of being rejected by your own child. And I let myself feel it without trying to fix it or minimize it or explain it away. By the time I pulled into my driveway, something had settled in me, something solid, something that felt unexpectedly like resolve. I made myself chamomile tea. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had done his homework for 12 years, the same table where Robert and I had paid our bills and planned our vacations and talked about everything that mattered, and I wrapped both hands around the warm mug. My phone was on the table in front of me. For 2 hours it was silent. I didn't expect them to call, not right away. At that table with the wine and the laughter and the expensive food, they wouldn't even notice I was gone. But I was wrong about the timing. Just after 9:30, my phone lit up. Daniel. I looked at his name on the screen for 3 full rings. Then I answered. Mom. His voice was different now. The ease was gone, the forced lightness. He sounded like himself, nervous, slightly panicked and young in a way he hadn't sounded in years. "Where did you go?" "Home," I said simply. You left without saying anything." "You weren't talking to me, Daniel. There wasn't much to say goodbye to." A pause. "Mom, listen, there's a situation." I waited. "The bill came," he said. Another pause. "How much?" I asked, though I already suspected I knew what was coming. "It's Amelia thought her parents were covering it. Her dad thought we were covering it since we invited them. And it's," I heard him exhale, "it's $3,400, Mom." $3,400. For a dinner at which I was given a table by the door and a bowl of soup. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Daniel," I said, "what exactly are you asking me?" "We need your help. Just your card, Mom. Just this once. We'll pay you back. I swear we'll—" "Your wife told me tonight," I said quietly, "that I don't belong at your table, that I'm not classy enough for her parents." Silence. "Mom." "She said I don't fit." Those were her words. I paused. "And you sat there and let her say it." I know, Mom, and I'm sorry it was—" "Daniel." My voice was gentle, completely gentle. I meant every word with love. "You made a decision tonight about where I belong. I'm going to honor that decision." Another long silence. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that you'll need to find another way to handle the bill." "Mom, please. We're talking about $3,400. I don't have that. We don't have that right now." "I know," I said. And I did know. I knew because I had been covering what they didn't have for 3 years. I knew because their lifestyle, the apartment in the good neighborhood, the cars, the dinners, the vacations they took twice a year, had been quietly subsidized by the woman they'd just asked to sit by the door. "Good night, Daniel," I said. "Mom, wait." I ended the call. I set my phone face down on the table. And then I sat in this quiet of my kitchen in the house I owned at the table that was mine, with my tea that was warm, and I thought, tomorrow things are going to be different. Tomorrow I'm going to take my life back, and I meant every word. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the anxious circular insomnia of someone who is afraid. It was the alert wakefulness of someone making decisions. I lay in bed with the window cracked and the curtains moving in the breeze, and I thought through every financial thread that connected me to my son and his wife. The credit card I was primary on. The car insurance policy that covered Amelia's vehicle under my account. The premium phone plan I had agreed to when they said it made sense. The monthly transfer I had started making $250 every first of the month for what Daniel called helping with groceries, and what I had slowly come to understand was just padding their account. I thought through each one. I thought about what each one meant, and by the time the birds started outside my window, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Let me say something here because I think it matters. I did not make those decisions out of spite. I want you to understand that. Because spite would have been easier in some ways. Spite is hot and fast and satisfying in the moment. Spite doesn't make you lie awake thinking about whether you're doing the right thing. What I felt that night was not spite. It was something colder and clearer. It was the recognition that I had spent 3 years allowing people to treat me as though my only value was what I could provide, and that the moment I stopped providing the moment, they couldn't reach my wallet, they would see me for what I truly was, someone they had forgotten to love, or worse, someone they had never quite gotten around to loving in the first place. And that recognition, that clear, devastating recognition, was not something I could unknow. I could forgive. I had room in my heart for forgiveness. I had spent 67 years building that room, but I was not going to be foolish again. And that is the difference between forgiveness and foolishness. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It lifts the weight of bitterness off your own back. But foolishness is walking back into the same situation with the same people under the same terms and expecting something different to happen. I was done being foolish. By 7 o'clock the next morning, I had made 3 calls. The first was to the credit card company. I canceled the card under my name. The account would be closed by end of business. The second was to my insurance provider. I removed Amelia's vehicle from my policy effective immediately. There would be a brief lapse that was her problem to solve, not mine. The third was to the phone carrier. I removed both Daniel and Amelia's lines from the plan I'd been funding. Then I called a locksmith, because Daniel still had a key to my house. He had always had a key, since he was 12 years old and could be trusted to come home from school on his own. That key had been a symbol of trust, of connection, of the fact that my home was always open to him. But I had thought about it in the night, and I had realized something. A home that is open to someone who doesn't respect you is not a sanctuary. It is just a place where you are not safe. The locksmith came at 9. By 9:45 I had new locks. I stood in my kitchen and held the new key and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Pure, quiet relief. They came at 2 in the afternoon. I heard Daniel's car in the driveway. I heard the car doors, both of them, which told me Amelia was there too. I did not go to the window. I went to the front hall and waited. The knock was hard. Not aggressive, not yet, but firm. The knock of someone who expects the door to open. "Mom, it's Daniel. Open up." I stood at the door. I did not open it. After a moment, there was another knock. Then Margaret. Amelia's voice. Tight. Controlled. I unlatched the chain but did not open the door fully. I left it at the width of my face. Amelia's expression on the other side of the glass outer door was something I will remember for a long time. She had the look of a woman who had woken up that morning to a series of shocks. The credit card declined, the insurance lapsed, the phone line dead, and who had spent the drive over deciding whose fault it was. "My card stopped working," she said. Not hello, not Margaret, straight to it. "I know," I said. "I closed the account." "You what?" Her voice jumped an octave. "You closed it. That's my card." "It was issued under my name," I said calmly. "My credit, my account. The phones are off." She was not keeping her voice low. Somewhere on my quiet street, I was certain someone had a window open. "Both our phones are just nothing. Dead. What did you do?" "I removed your lines from my plan." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom." His face had the look of someone trying to hold 2 things at once: loyalty to his wife and the deep instinctive pull of having done something wrong to his mother. Can you open the door? Can we come in and talk about this?" I looked at him. I looked at him for a long moment, and I saw my son, my child, the boy I had poured 35 years of love into, standing on my porch, asking to be let back into a home he had stopped treating as sacred. "No," I said. Daniel blinked. "Mom." "You can stand there and talk," I said. "I'll listen, but you're not coming inside. Not today." Amelia's face tightened. "This is insane. You're doing this because of one dinner, one comment?" "No," I said. "I'm doing this because of 3 years." "3 years of what?" Her voice was climbing. 3 years of us letting you be part of our lives. 3 years of... 3 years, I said clearly over her, of paying your bills, funding your life, being the safety net you pull when things get hard. I paused. "And 3 years of being treated like someone who should be grateful for the privilege." She opened her mouth. I kept going. "Last night you told me I wasn't classy enough to sit with your parents. You pointed me to a table by the door, like I was an inconvenience to be managed." I looked at Daniel. "And your husband watched it happen. He sat there with a menu in front of his face, and he let it happen." Daniel looked down. "I didn't want to make things worse," he said quietly. "Amelia's parents were right there. I didn't want a scene." "I know," I said. "That's exactly it. You didn't want a scene. You didn't want things to be uncomfortable. I felt my voice soften, not because I was softening, but because what I was saying mattered too much for anger. You chose your comfort over my dignity, and you've been choosing it for a long time. The three of us stood in the cold air between my door and my porch. No one spoke for a moment. Then, Amelia said very quietly, and I think this was as close as she could get to vulnerability. So what happens now? I looked at her. Now, I said, you figure out your own phone plan. You find your own insurance for your car. You handle your own credit card. I paused. And you think about what kind of people you want to be. And us. Daniel's voice was rough. What about us, Mom? I looked at my son. I felt the love. God, I felt it. It never goes away. It never becomes less. And I also felt something new standing alongside it. Boundaries. I love you, I said. I will always love you. That's not the question. Then what? The question is whether you can love me back without needing something from me. I held his gaze. Whether you can see me as a person, not a resource. He had no answer. Not right then. I closed the door gently. I turned around and I walked back through my hallway into my kitchen. I put the kettle on, and I sat down at my table in my home and the life I had built and earned and paid for in more ways than money, and I waited for the kettle to boil. Outside, I heard the sound of Daniel's car backing out of the driveway, and I wrapped both hands around my mug, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the house felt entirely like mine. The kettle boiled. I poured the water over the tea bag and watched the color bloom outward through the hot water pale gold, first then amber, then a deep, rich brown. I don't know why I remember that detail so clearly. I suppose when everything around you is crumbling, your mind reaches for small certain things. The color of tea, the warmth of a ceramic mug against your palms, the sound of your own breathing in a quiet house. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after Daniel's car pulled away. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect that a mother in my position would collapse, would sit at her kitchen table and sob into her hands. And maybe there was a version of me, the version from 3 years ago, the version who still believed that love was enough to fix anything, who would have done exactly that. But the woman sitting in that kitchen on Saturday afternoon was not that woman anymore. She had died somewhere between the hostess stand and the table by the door. What was left was something harder, something quieter, something that had been there all along underneath all the hoping and the giving and the saying, yes, a woman who knew her own worth and had simply for too long allowed others to set a lower price. I finished my tea, I rinsed the mug, I put it back in the cabinet, and then I sat back down and I opened my laptop. I had some things to figure out. The first thing I needed to understand was the full picture of what I had been providing. Not because I wanted to be angry about it. Anger burns too much energy and I needed every bit of energy I had, but because I could not make clear decisions without clear information. So I opened my bank statements. I opened my insurance portal. I opened the credit card account before I canceled it, and I looked at the last 12 months of transactions. What I found took my breath away. Not in a dramatic movie moment kind of way, more the way it takes your breath away when you step outside in January and the cold hits before you're ready for it. In the last 12 months alone, I had contributed directly and indirectly just over $19,000 to Daniel and Amelia's life. $19,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $19,000. That was the vacation I had been postponing for 4 years, the one Robert and I had always planned to take a river cruise through Europe, something slow and beautiful and ours. That was the kitchen renovation I'd been putting off because there was always something more pressing. That was 2 years of college tuition adjusted for when Daniel had been young, and tuition had been lower, and I had worked nights to cover it. $19,000. And in exchange, I had been pointed to a table by the door. I closed the laptop. I went to bed early that Saturday night and slept for 9 hours straight, the deepest, most uninterrupted sleep I had had in years. And when I woke up Sunday morning, the sun was already bright through my curtains, and somewhere in my chest, something had shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but shifted, like a bone setting back into place after being dislocated for too long. Painful in its correction, but right. The Sunday after everything happened was the first Sunday in 3 years that I didn't wait for Daniel to call. Usually, Sunday mornings had their rhythm. I would wake up, I would make coffee, I would sit near the phone and half wait, half pretend I wasn't waiting for Daniel to check in. Sometimes he did, more often he didn't. And on the Sundays he didn't, I would fill the silence with whatever I could find, gardening old movies, long walks through the neighborhood, and I would tell myself it was fine. Young people are busy. Marriages take time. He knows I'm here. That Sunday, I didn't wait. I made coffee. I took it outside to the porch. I sat in the old wooden chair that Robert had refinished the summer before he got sick, the one with the slightly uneven armrest that I had never gotten fixed, because it was imperfect in the way that things you love are imperfect, and I watched my street come to life. Mrs. Patterson from 4 houses down was walking her ancient beagle. She waved. The Hernandez kids were already in the front yard doing something loud and chaotic that involved a garden hose. A cardinal landed on the bird bath in my front yard, ruffled its feathers, decided the water was acceptable, and stayed. I watched all of it, and I thought, this is my life. This has always been my life. I just stopped paying attention to it. My phone stayed silent. I didn't reach for it once. That was its own kind of milestone, small, private, and enormously significant. 3 days passed. 3 days of quiet, 3 days of the new locks and the canceled accounts and the strange, wide-open feeling of a life no longer organized around someone else's needs. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Not Daniel, not Amelia. It was my friend Beverly. Beverly Cole and I had known each other for 31 years. We had met at a church potluck. She had brought the best sweet potato pie I had ever tasted, and I had asked her for the recipe, and she had laughed and said she'd rather just make it for me every Thanksgiving. And that had been the beginning of a friendship that had survived divorces and deaths and diagnoses and every other thing that life had thrown at both of us. Beverly had watched what happened with Daniel and Amelia from the sidelines. She had voiced her concerns carefully because Beverly understood the delicacy of the subject more than once. And more than once I had gently pushed back. He's my son. She's his wife. I have to give them time. Beverly had accepted that. She had never pushed. She had simply been there, consistent and steady, in the way that genuinely good friends are. Maggie, she said when I answered. She was the only person in the world who still called me Maggie, and every time she did, I felt about 20 years younger. How are you doing? I thought about giving her the polished answer, the fine Beverly just fine answer that I had been giving everyone for 3 years. Honestly, I said. Always honestly with me, you know that. I'm shaky, I said. But I think it's the good kind of shaky, like after you've finally said something you've been holding in for too long and your whole body doesn't know what to do with the relief. A pause. Then, what happened? So I told her. I told her everything. The phone call, the restaurant, the table by the door, Daniel's silence, the bill, the conversation through the door, the $19,000 on the laptop screen. I told her all of it in one long breath sitting on my porch in the afternoon sun. And when I finished, Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lord have mercy, Maggie." I know. Lord have that woman pointed you to a table by the door. She did. In front of Daniel. I was looking at the menu. Another pause, longer this time. And he didn't say a word. Not one, Beverly exhaled slowly. I had known her long enough to know what that exhale meant. It meant she was choosing her words with care, because what she actually wanted to say would take up the rest of the afternoon. How do you feel? She finally asked. Like I've been underwater for 3 years, I said, and someone finally let me up for air. That's a good way to feel, she said. Hold on to that. I'm trying. Are you eating, sleeping? Slept 9 hours Friday night. 9 hours. She sounded almost amused. That's your body telling you something. I know what my body is telling me. Good. Then, what are you going to do, Maggie, long term? What's the plan? I had been thinking about this. Off and on for 3 days, I had been turning it over. I'm going to live my life, I said simply, the one I forgot I had. Beverly was quiet for a beat. Then she said softly, "It's still there, your life. I can promise you that." We talked for another hour. About nothing important. About the cardinal that had taken up residence in my birdbath. About Beverly's daughter's new job in Atlanta. About the sweet potato pie recipe that Beverly had in 31 years, still never fully shared with me. We laughed, which I hadn't done in days, and when I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in longer than I could accurately remember. That was Wednesday. On Friday, something happened that I did not expect. I was in the garden I had been neglecting for months, the one with the tomatoes that had come in late, and the rose bushes that needed pruning badly, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path along the side of the house. I straightened up. It was Amelia. She was alone. No Daniel. She had parked on the street and come around the side of the house, which meant she had seen my car in the driveway and known I was home. She was wearing yoga clothes, which somehow made the whole thing stranger. There was something unexpectedly human about seeing her, without the armor of her usual perfect presentation. Her hair was pulled back. She wasn't wearing the diamonds. She looked for the first time since I had known her like a person instead of a performance. I said nothing. I waited. She stopped a few feet away. She looked at the garden. She looked at my hands, which were still holding the pruning shears. "I need to talk to you," she said. "All right," I said. I set the shears down on the garden bench. "Talk." She had clearly prepared something. I could see it in the way she stood, the particular posture of someone who has rehearsed. But whatever she had planned to say seemed to be giving her trouble now that she was actually here, actually standing in front of me. "The insurance," she started. "I already told you," I said. "You'll need your own policy." I'm not here about that." She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "My father asked about you at dinner the other night, after you left." That surprised me. I didn't let it show. "Did he?" "He noticed that you were seated away from the table." She said it carefully, like she was walking across thin ice and testing each word before she put her weight on it. "He asked Daniel why." "What did Daniel say?" She hesitated. "He said it was a seating preference." I almost laughed. I did not laugh. "And your father accepted that?" Something crossed her face. "He didn't say much, but on the way back to the hotel he told my mother he thought we'd been rude to you." I held her gaze. He was right. Amelia flinched. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was real. "My father," she said slowly, "has worked his entire life. He built everything from nothing. His parents were immigrants. His first job was washing dishes." She paused. He's not the person I've been pretending he is to justify." She stopped herself. I watched her. "To justify what?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the rose bushes. Then she looked back at me. "I thought if I kept things a certain way," she said, "maintained a certain image, he would be proud of me. That's what I've spent my whole life doing, making things look right. And I didn't look right. No." She said it without apology, which I actually respected more than if she'd dressed it up. "You didn't fit the picture I was trying to present. And now my father thinks I was rude, and my husband has barely spoken to me since Saturday, and the picture is already broken." She met my eyes. "So I'm here." I thought about what to say for a long moment. "Amelia," I said finally, "you came here today because things fell apart. The card stopped working, the phone lines went dead, your father disapproved. Daniel is pulling away. You came here because the picture you were holding is in pieces on the floor." I held her gaze. "That's not the same as an apology." She blinked. "What you did to me at that restaurant," I said, "was not a small thing. You looked at me, at my clothes, my shoes, my whole self, and you decided I was less than you, less than your parents, less than deserving of a seat at my own son's table." I kept my voice steady. "That kind of judgment doesn't come from nowhere. It's been building for a while. I felt it every time I walked through your door." She was very still. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise," I said. "And I'm not going to pretend this is an apology, because it isn't. It's damage control. And that's fine, at least you showed up." I picked up the pruning shears again. "But if you want things to actually change, it's going to take more than showing up once when things are already bad." She stood there for another moment. Then she nodded once and walked back around the side of the house to her car. I went back to the rose bushes. My hands were steady. I noticed that. Steady hands. After everything, the dinner, the silence, the door, the conversation. $19,000 on a laptop screen, 3 days of quiet, and now this, my hands were steady. I thought Robert would be proud of you, Maggie, and I believed it. The following week moved in a way I had forgotten. Weeks could move with something resembling ease. I called the travel agent I had used years ago, a woman named Carol, who operated out of a small office downtown and who had always given us excellent advice and honest pricing. I told her I was interested in a river cruise, something slow. Europe, ideally the Rhine maybe, or the Danube. Something I could take in October or November when the colors were right and the summer crowds had thinned. Carol called me back the next morning with 3 options. I chose the Danube. Budapest to Amsterdam, 17 days. I paid the deposit that afternoon. That felt like something. That felt like standing up after a long time on the floor. That night I sat on the porch until it was dark and thought about all the things I had been putting off. Not just the trip, the kitchen faucet that dripped, the back bedroom that I'd been meaning to clear out and turn into a proper reading room, the memoir class at the community center that Beverly had been urging me to try for 2 years, the book club that Mrs. Patterson had invited me to join 4 times, and 4 times I had declined because I was always half waiting for Daniel to call. I wrote a list, not a dramatic list, not a life overhaul manifesto, just a quiet, practical list of things I wanted to do that I had been not doing. And then 10 days after the night at the restaurant, Daniel came back, not in a car this time, not with Amelia. He walked. He lived about 20 minutes away by foot, and he walked the whole way, which told me something that he'd needed: the time, the movement, the deliberate choosing of each step. I saw him coming up the front path from the window. I watched him for a moment before I went to the door. He looked different than he had on the porch that Saturday. The defensive stiffness was gone. His shoulders were lower. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on Harrison Street that we used to go to together when he was in college. Their paper cups had the little green logo I'd known for 20 years. He knocked. I opened the door, the full door, not the width of my face, and we looked at each other. "I walked," he said, as if I couldn't see that. "I know," I said. "Can I sit on the porch?" Not "can I come in?" The porch. "Yes," I said. We sat in the 2 wooden chairs, and he handed me the coffee, and I wrapped my hands around it, the way I had wrapped them around the mug of tea 10 days ago, and for a while, neither of us said anything. The street was quiet. A dog somewhere was barking at something distant. The cardinal, my cardinal, I had started thinking of it as mine, was in the birdbath again. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you," Daniel said finally. "For 10 days I've been going through it in my head, and I keep starting over because nothing sounds like enough." I waited. "I was a coward," he said. He said it plain. No cushioning, no preamble, no preemptive excuses. Just, I was a coward. I turned my head and looked at him. He was looking down at his coffee cup. He had his father's jaw, the line of it, the particular set it took when he was holding something difficult. He started, then stopped, started again. "I've been trying to make everyone happy for 3 years. Amelia has very specific ideas about how things should be, how we should live, how things should look, who we should be around. And I kept telling myself that if I kept the peace, if I didn't rock the boat, that eventually it would settle, that you would be patient, and Amelia would soften, and eventually we'd find some middle ground. And instead," I said, "instead I let 3 years go by," he said, "and I let things happen that I shouldn't have let happen." He finally looked up. "The dinner. Mom, I knew what Amelia was going to do before we even got there. She had mentioned on the way over that she wanted the table to look a certain way, that she wanted her parents to see us a certain way, and I didn't stop it." I felt something tighten in my chest. "You knew," I said. "I didn't know she was going to send you to another table," he said quickly. "I didn't know it would be like that, but I knew there was a reason she'd planned the seating, and I didn't ask, because I was afraid of what the answer would be." I held his gaze. "Daniel," I said slowly, "if you knew something was off, if you had any sense that something unkind was being planned, and you walked in there with me anyway without a word—" "I know." His voice was rough. "I know, Mom." "That's not just cowardice," I said. "That's something worse. That's letting someone walk into a fire because you didn't want the trouble of warning them." He nodded. His jaw worked. "I know," he said again. "I know exactly what it is." The silence between us was heavy. But it was a different kind of heavy than the silence at the restaurant that had been the silence of absence, of someone looking away. This was the silence of 2 people sitting with a truth that is too uncomfortable to rush past. "What do you want, Daniel?" I said eventually. "From me. What are you asking for?" "I want my mother back," he said. Simple as that. 4 words, and I felt them land. "I never went anywhere," I said quietly. "I was in the same place I've always been. You stopped showing up." He swallowed hard. "I know. You stopped calling. You stopped asking. You stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a—" I paused, choosing the word carefully. A resource, something you tapped when you needed something and didn't tend to otherwise. That's not—" He stopped, reconsidered. "That's not entirely fair." "No, I still love you, Mom." "I know you do," I said. "I never doubted that you loved me. Love isn't the question." I leaned back in the chair. "The question is whether love means anything without care, whether it means anything if it only shows up when it needs something, whether I'm supposed to just accept crumbs of attention and replace them with generosity and call that a relationship." He was quiet for a long time. The dog had stopped barking. The street was very still. "Amelia told me she went to see you," he said. "She did." "What did she say?" "She said your father noticed I was seated away from the table and thought it was rude." Daniel exhaled. He didn't just think it. He and I had a conversation. He looked at me. He's different than how Amelia has always described him. He's not the person who would look down on you. That was Amelia's story about her parents, not the actual truth of them." He shook his head. "Her father pulled me aside at the hotel the next morning and told me that I had embarrassed myself. Those were his exact words." I raised an eyebrow. "Gerald Worthington said that—" He said— Daniel stopped, steadied his voice. "He said a man who lets his wife disrespect his mother has forgotten who he is, and that I should think carefully about who I wanted to be." I was quiet for a moment. "He's not wrong," I said. "No," Daniel said. "He's not." Another silence. Then, "Amelia and I have been fighting. Really fighting, not the surface stuff. The real things." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I told her what I should have told her a long time ago, that the way she's treated you is not acceptable to me, that it never was, and that I was wrong for not saying so sooner." "How did she take that?" she cried. He looked briefly surprised by his own memory of it. "And then she got very quiet, and then she said she needed to think, and she's been doing a lot of thinking for about a week." "That could go any direction," I said. "I know." He didn't look away. "Whatever happens, Mom, whatever she decides, or I decide, or we decide, I need you to know that I am not going to treat you as optional anymore." I looked at my son. I looked at his father's jaw, his father's eyes, the same worried forehead crease Robert had when he was holding something he meant. "I've heard things before," I said. "Nice things, things that sounded like change and turned out to be apologies for continuations. I know. I need to see it, Daniel, not hear it, see it." "I know, Mom." He leaned forward. "And I'm not asking you to trust me because I said so. I'm asking you to leave the door open, just a little, let me show you." I thought about what Beverly had said on the phone. "It's still there. Your life. I can promise you that." I thought about the river cruise deposit I'd paid, the list on my kitchen table, the reading room I was going to make. I thought about the woman I was becoming, or rather returning to, the woman who had always been there under the weight of someone else's expectations. "I will always be your mother," I said finally. "Nothing changes that." He exhaled a long, shuddering exhale. "But things are different now," I said. "My life is mine, my time is mine, my money is mine, and the people I invite into my life, into my home, into my time, they earn that. They don't assume it." He nodded. "And Amelia," I said, "she's your wife. You've made a commitment to her, and I respect that. But she and I are going to have to find our own way. That's not something you can fix for us. It has to come from her." "I understand," he said. "And I mean that," I said. "Whatever she's sorting through, let her sort it. Don't push her toward me to manage your guilt. If she comes to me, she needs to come honestly, not as damage control." He looked at me. "You already told her that." "I know. I'm telling you too." He smiled, small, tired, genuine. "You haven't changed, Mom." "I've changed plenty," I said, "but my standards haven't." We finished the coffee. We talked for another 40 minutes about small things, the garden, the dripping faucet, the trip I was planning. When I mentioned the Danube cruise, he went quiet for a moment. "You're really going," he said. "I already paid the deposit." "That's Mom." Something moved through his face. "That's something you and Dad always talked about." "It is," I said. "I should have gone years ago." He looked at his hands. "I'm glad you're going." And I believed him. That was the thing, I believed him. Not because I was naive, and not because the hurt was gone, and not because I had forgotten a single second of what had happened in that restaurant, but because I knew my son. I had known him his whole life. I knew the difference between the voice he used when he was performing and the voice he used when he meant it. He meant it. That didn't fix everything. It didn't fix anything technically. It was a beginning at best, a tentative, fragile, uncertain beginning that could still go wrong in a dozen ways. But it was real. And I had learned something in the 10 days since the restaurant real was the only thing worth accepting. When he got up to leave, I stood too. We were quiet for a moment. Then he hugged me. Not the quick one-armed thing from the restaurant entrance. A real hug, both arms, the kind that remembers how it learned to do this, the kind that holds on. I hugged him back. "I love you," he said into my shoulder. "I'm sorry." "I love you too," I said. "Go home." He walked down the front path. I watched him from the porch until he turned the corner and was out of sight. Then I went inside and sat at my kitchen table and picked up my list. The river cruise, the reading room, the memoir class, the book club, the kitchen faucet. I added one more line at the bottom. Give Daniel the chance to be who he says he wants to be. That felt right. Not soft, not naive, right. And somewhere between writing that line and putting the pen down, something moved through me, something I am not sure I can name exactly. Not happiness, not yet, but the particular bone-deep recognition that the worst of it was behind me, that I had walked through something that would have broken a younger version of me. And I was still here. Steady hands. Still here. 2 weeks after Daniel walked away from my porch, 2 weeks after I watched him turn that corner and disappear, the calls started. Not from Daniel, not from Amelia, from Patricia Worthington. I want you to understand how unexpected that was. Patricia Worthington, who had sat at that restaurant table and looked through me like I was furniture. Patricia Worthington, who had not offered me a single word of greeting that entire evening. Patricia, who had examined the menu with such fierce concentration while her daughter pointed me to the table by the door. That Patricia Worthington called my phone on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in my kitchen making oatmeal. I stared at the number for 2 full rings. I didn't recognize it at first. It came up as a South Carolina area code, not her usual number, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Margaret." Her voice was different than I remembered it from the restaurant. Quieter, more careful. "This is Patricia, Patricia Worthington." "I know who you are," I said. A pause. "I imagine you do." I waited. I stirred my oatmeal. I was not going to make this easy for her. "I wanted to call you," she said, "because Gerald and I have been talking. A great deal, actually. About that evening." Another pause. "About what happened with you." "All right," I said. "I owe you an apology," she said. That surprised me more than the call itself. I set the spoon down. "For," I said, "not to be difficult, but because I needed to know if she understood what she was apologizing for, or if she was offering one of those large, shapeless apologies that cover everything without naming anything. For sitting there," she said, "for not saying a word when Amelia asked you to move to another table." Her voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it. Effort. I saw it happen, Gerald saw it happen, and we both sat there and said nothing. That was wrong. I leaned against the counter. "It was," I said. "Margaret, I want you to know something." She stopped. I heard her exhale. "Amelia has told us over the years a certain version of you, a version that I accepted without question, because she is my daughter, and because it was easier to accept than to examine." A long pause. "I should have examined it." "What version?" I said. "That you were," she searched for the word, "difficult. That you inserted yourself where you weren't wanted. That you made Daniel feel guilty for building his own life." She said it plainly without softening, and I respected that. "She made you sound like a problem she was managing." I absorbed that. Difficult. Inserting myself. Making Daniel feel guilty. 3 years of paying their bills. 3 years of saying yes. 3 years of shrinking myself to fit into whatever space they allowed me. And the story being told about me in my absence was that I was the problem. "I see," I said. "Gerald and I talked to Amelia after we got back to the hotel that night," Patricia said. It was not an easy conversation. Gerald was very direct with her. He told her that what she had done was beneath her. Those were his words. A brief pause. Gerald does not give those conversations lightly. "Daniel told me something similar," I said. "I know. Gerald spoke to Daniel too." She paused. "The thing is, Margaret and I am telling you this because I think you deserve to know it. Amelia was not raised to behave that way. Gerald built everything he has with his hands. His parents came here with nothing. He has never in his life looked down on another person for what they wore or where they came from." Her voice tightened slightly. Whatever she has become, whatever ideas about class and image she developed, they did not come from us. And that is something Gerald and I are going to have to examine very carefully. I thought about Amelia standing in my garden, the yoga clothes, the hair pulled back, the way she'd said I thought if I kept things a certain way, he would be proud of me. She had been performing for her parents, performing a version of class and sophistication that she believed they wanted to see. And the truth was, they had never asked for that performance at all. Your daughter is not a bad person, I said slowly. I believe that. I think she is a woman who got very attached to a particular image of herself and became willing to do unkind things to maintain it. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's more generous than she deserves right now. Maybe, I said, but it's also honest. I want to ask you something, Patricia said, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Ask. Is there any path forward with her with all of it? She paused. I'm asking as a mother. As someone who loves her daughter even when her daughter is wrong. I don't expect you to have forgiven her. I'm just asking if there is a door that is still open. I thought about that for a long time, long enough that Patricia said softly, You don't have to answer today. No, I said. I'll answer. I stood up straight. There is always a door open, Patricia. I'm not a person who locks things permanently, but a door being open is not the same as a door being walked through freely. It means the possibility exists. What happens next depends on what people do with that possibility. Another silence. That's fair, she said. It's the truth, I said. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing that changed the central facts of the situation, but about things that mattered: her garden in Colombia, her husband's health, the kind of slow and careful conversation that two women have when they are both trying to figure out what they owe each other. When we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Patricia Worthington had called me, had apologized, had told me the story Amelia had been telling about me for years, had asked if there was a way forward. And something about all of it made me feel unexpectedly not vindicated. Vindication was too small a word, too petty, but seen. Finally, genuinely seen by someone who had previously chosen not to look. I ate my oatmeal cold. I didn't mind. That evening, Beverly came over. I had told her about the call and she'd insisted on coming by, and she showed up at 6 with takeout from the Thai place on Cannon Street and a look on her face that meant she had opinions she was barely containing. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat with cold tea and hot grief 2 weeks ago, and we ate pad thai, and Beverly listened to the whole Patricia story without interrupting, which was a personal record for her. When I finished, she pointed her fork at me. She called you, Beverly said. She did. Patricia Worthington, who sat at that table and said nothing, called you to apologize. That is what happened. Beverly put her fork down. Maggie, do you understand what that means? Tell me what you think it means. It means the story is spreading, Beverly said. It means people are talking. People on that side of the table are looking at each other and going, Wait, did we do something wrong? She leaned forward. That's not nothing. That's the beginning of accountability. Or it's damage control, I said. Could be both, Beverly said. Usually is. She picked her fork back up. How do you feel about it? I paused, tried to find the right word. I feel like I am watching something play out that I didn't direct, like I set something in motion and now I'm watching where it goes. Beverly nodded slowly. And that feels okay. Mostly, I said. There are moments when it doesn't. There are moments when I miss who I thought my life was. I looked at the table. I missed the version of Daniel I thought I had, the son who called every day, the one who asked about the garden. That person is still in there, Beverly said. You saw him on the porch. I saw someone trying to find his way back to being that person, I said. That's not the same as him already being there. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then, no, you're right, it's not. She met my eyes. But it's something worth watching. I know, I said. I'm watching. 17 days after the restaurant, that's when the second unexpected thing happened. And this one I truly did not see coming. I was at the community center. Beverly had finally convinced me to try the memoir class, and I had shown up on a Thursday evening with a notebook and a pen and the general feeling of someone doing something for themselves for the first time in years. The class was run by a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, retired English professor sharp as a tack, the kind of teacher who asks questions that take a week to answer properly. There were 12 of us in the room, Mostly women, mostly my age. One man in his 70s named Frank who had fought in Vietnam and was writing about it with a quiet, devastating precision that made the whole room go still when he read. Dr. Marsh had us write for 15 minutes on a prompt. Write about the moment you realized something you had believed was not true. I wrote for 15 minutes without stopping. I wrote about the restaurant, about the chair and the menu and Daniel's silence and the table by the door. I wrote about the pearl necklace that had been Robert's gift, and about the soup, and about walking out into the night air and finding 4 stars. When Dr. Marsh asked if anyone wanted to share, my hand went up before I fully decided to raise it. I read what I had written. The room was very quiet when I finished. Frank, the Vietnam veteran, said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has read in this class." A woman named Gloria, who sat next to me and had been writing about her divorce, reached over and touched my arm. Dr. Marsh looked at me for a long moment and said, "Margaret, you have a gift for writing the interior of experience. The way you describe what you saw versus what you felt, that gap is where all the most interesting stories live." I had not written anything since Robert died. He used to say I wrote the best letters he had ever received long before email made letters feel old-fashioned. He kept every one. Walking to my car after class that night, Beverly linked her arm through mine and said, "I told you. You told me. And you were right," I said. "Don't let it go to your head." She laughed. We were in the parking lot when my phone rang. Daniel. I answered immediately because something in the timing, 9:30 on a Thursday night, felt different. "Mom." His voice was tight, not the careful, rehearsed tightness of a difficult conversation he'd prepared for. This was raw. "Daniel, what's wrong?" "Amelia and I had a fight," he said. "A real one, the kind we haven't had before." He exhaled. "She said some things, I said some things, and she left. She took a bag and she went to stay with her friend Claire." I stood still in the parking lot. Beverly looked at me questioning. "Is she safe?" I asked first. Yes, she's fine. It wasn't like that. She just needed space." "Okay," I said. "What happened?" I told her. He stopped. I heard him move, heard the sound of him sitting down somewhere. I told her that I had been talking to you, that things were changing, that I was going to be different in how I treated you, and that I needed her to be different too. And she asked me what that meant, and I told her it meant she needed to apologize to you. A real apology. Not the showing up in the garden thing. A real one. And she said she had already gone to see you. She said she had done what she could." His voice was frustrated. "And I told her that going to your house and talking about her father's opinion wasn't the same as saying I was wrong and I am sorry and what I did was unacceptable. And she didn't take that well." I thought about Amelia in the garden, the yoga clothes, the carefully walked ice, the way she had not quite said sorry and had not quite not said it. "She's not used to being called accountable," I said. "No," Daniel said. "She's not." A long pause. "Mom, I'm sitting in our apartment and it's empty, and I don't know if I handled this right." "You handled it honestly," I said. "That's not always comfortable. Was it the right call to push her on the apology?" I thought about it carefully. "Yes," I said. "Because if she never actually says it, if there's never a moment where she acknowledges what she did and what it cost, then nothing really changes. You just paper over it and move on, and the same thing happens in a different room 3 years from now." "That's what I thought," he said. "I just needed to hear it." "Daniel," I kept my voice even, "whatever happens between you and Amelia, that's your marriage, and I'm not going to insert myself into it. But I want you to know something." "What?" "I'm proud of you," I said, "for saying what needed to be said. That took courage." He was quiet for a moment. "Thanks, Mom," he said, and the way he said it, small, young, grateful, broke something open in me. Not painfully. The way things break open in the spring. We talked for a while longer. I sat in my car in the parking lot while Beverly waited with enormous and uncharacteristic patience. When I finally hung up and started the engine, she said, "Well, Amelia left," I said. "Went to stay with a friend. They had a real fight." Beverly processed this. "Because of you. Because of Daniel finally saying what needed to be said." I said, "About me, but not only about me." Beverly looked out the window. "That marriage is either going to get real or fall apart," she said. "I know," I said. "How do you feel about that?" I pulled out of the parking lot. "I feel like it's not mine to control. It never was." Beverly nodded. "Good answer. I've been working on those." 3 days later on a Sunday, Amelia came back. Not to my house, to Daniel. She came back to their apartment, and whatever conversation they had that afternoon, I only know from what Daniel told me later that it was long and it was honest, and that at the end of it, they had agreed to see a couples counselor. That surprised me. I had not expected that from Amelia. The willingness to sit with a stranger and be told where she was wrong, that required a kind of openness I had not credited her with. Maybe I was wrong about her. Or maybe she was capable of more than the version of herself she had been presenting. Maybe both things were true at once. I kept that thought and didn't do anything with it yet. Some things need time before you know what they are. What happened next came on a Wednesday. I was in the reading room, the back bedroom that I had officially finally begun to convert. I had moved the old boxes to the garage, picked out a chair from the furniture consignment shop that Beverly had taken me to, and ordered a small bookcase that had not yet arrived. The room was still mostly empty, but it already felt like mine, like intention made space. I was putting books on the windowsill, just a few the ones I wanted nearest, when the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I went to the door and looked through the glass. Amelia. But not Amelia the way I was used to seeing her. Not the red dress Amelia, or the yoga clothes Amelia, or even the garden Amelia. This was a version of her I had never seen. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. No jewelry I could see. Hair down loose the way she probably wore it at home alone. She was holding something, a white bakery box, the kind with the string around it that you get from an actual bakery, not a grocery store chain. She looked for the entire world like a person, not a performance, a person. I opened the door. We looked at each other for a moment. "I brought something," she said, lifting the box slightly. "I didn't know what you liked, so I got an assortment from the place on King Street. Beverly mentioned once that you like almond croissants, and I asked for those specifically." She stopped. "I'm sorry. That was a strange thing to lead with." "Come in," I said. I surprised myself by saying it. "Come in. Not stand on the porch, not talk through the glass. Come in." She followed me to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. She set the bakery box on the table and stood with her hands at her sides, looking like someone who had rehearsed a different version of this moment and was now improvising. "Sit down, Amelia," I said. She sat. I made tea. I opened the bakery box. There were 4 almond croissants and 2 plain ones and a small fruit tart. I put everything on a plate and set it on the table and sat down across from her. She was looking at her hands. "I want to say something," she said. "And I want to say it right this time, not the way I did in the garden." "All right. What I did at the restaurant was wrong." She looked up, met my eyes directly, which I could see cost her something. Not just impolite, not just a mistake in judgment. Wrong. It was cruel and it was deliberate, and there is no explanation for it that makes it acceptable. I looked at you, and I decided you weren't good enough to sit at that table, and I acted on that decision, and... Her voice caught. She steadied it. "And it wasn't true. None of it was true. You are a better person than I have ever given you credit for, and I have treated you badly for a long time, and I am sorry." The kitchen was very quiet. I looked at her. I had imagined this moment. Sometime in the first few days after the restaurant, lying awake in the dark, I had imagined what it would feel like to hear those words from Amelia. I had imagined feeling triumphant, validated, the cold satisfaction of being acknowledged. But sitting there in my kitchen across from a woman who was choosing for the first time to be fully honest with me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and something else, something that surprised me, compassion. Not for what she had done. I was not going to perform forgiveness I hadn't reached yet. But compassion for what I could see underneath the apology, a woman who had tied her entire self-worth to an image that her own father had never asked her to create, who had spent years managing perceptions and sacrificing realness for appearances, and who was now slowly and painfully starting to understand what that had cost her. I thought about Robert, about something he used to say when I was hard on someone who had hurt me. "Maggie, everyone is fighting something you can't see." "I hear you," I said. Amelia looked at me. She had been expecting I could see it something more immediate, either a rejection or a reconciliation. What she got was 2 words. "Is that—" She paused. "Is that enough for now?" "It's the beginning," I said. "A real beginning, which is different from what you offered in the garden." "I know," she said. "I wasn't ready in the garden. I thought I was, but I wasn't." "What changed?" She looked at her hands again, then back up. Daniel and I have started seeing someone, a counselor, and she asked me in our second session to describe you. To describe you honestly, not the version I'd been carrying around. And I started talking, and I realized that the person I was describing wasn't you. It was a story I'd been telling to make my own behavior feel justified. She paused, and she asked me what would happen if you just stopped defending the story and looked at the actual person. A long pause. So I'm trying to do that. I picked up my tea. I held it. Who did you describe when you were being honest? I said. What did you actually say? Amelia thought about it. I said you were someone who had given everything to the people she loved and received very little back, and that instead of becoming bitter, you had become more gracious, and that I had always found that... She stopped. Threatening, she said finally. I found it threatening, because it reminded me that there was another way to be. I sat with that for a moment, threatening. My kindness, my grace, my way of giving had been read as a threat, because it was a mirror held up to something she could not face in herself. I thought, Robert, are you hearing this? Do you hear what is happening in our kitchen? Amelia, I said, I am not your enemy. I never was. I know that now, she said, and I am not someone you need to manage or position or arrange around. I'm Daniel's mother. I'm a person, that's all. I know, she said again, quieter. I can't promise you that everything will be easy from here, I said. I can't promise I won't have days when I'm angry about what happened, because I will. What was done to me hurt. It hurt for a long time before the restaurant. The restaurant was just where it finally broke the surface. She nodded. But I am willing, I said carefully, to start from here, from this conversation, and see what we can build that is actually real instead of whatever we were doing before. Amelia exhaled, long, slow shaking slightly. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We ate the croissants. We drank the tea. We talked slowly, carefully, like people learning a new language together about small things, about the memoir class, about the reading room I was building, about the Danube cruise which made Amelia's eyes go wide. Budapest to Amsterdam, she said. 17 days. 17 days, I confirmed. That's Margaret, that's incredible. And she sounded genuine, actually genuine. When do you leave, October? You'll see the autumn colors on the river, she said. Gerald and my mother did a Rhine cruise 2 years ago. She said the colors were unreal. That's what I'm hoping for, I said. We were quiet for a moment, a comfortable quiet, the first one we had ever shared. Then she said, Can I ask you something? Go ahead. The financial stuff, the card, the insurance, the phones. She met my eyes. Was that always going to happen? Or was that specifically because of the restaurant? I thought about how to answer that honestly. The restaurant was the moment I saw clearly enough to act, I said. But what I saw that night had been true for a long time. I had been providing things that were no longer gifts. They had become assumptions. That was as much my failure as yours. I let it go on too long without saying anything. She nodded slowly. We relied on you in ways that weren't fair. Yes. And we didn't... She stopped. We didn't show you the gratitude you deserved. No. Another silence. I want to make that right, she said. Not financially, I understand that's done. That's your decision. But I want you to know that I see it now. What you did for us. What it cost you. Thank you for saying that, I said. And I meant it. Not as a closing, not as an ending. As a genuine thank you for a genuine thing said. She left an hour later. At the door, she paused. Margaret. She didn't quite look at me. I know this doesn't fix everything. No, I said. It doesn't. But I mean it. All of it. I looked at her. At the jeans and the blue sweater and the no jewelry and the hair down and the woman underneath all the performance who had been there all along, just very well hidden. I believe you, I said. She walked to her car. I closed the door. I stood in my front hall for a long moment. Then I went to the reading room and sat in the new chair and looked at the books on the windowsill and thought about everything, about Patricia's phone call, about Daniel on the porch, about Amelia at the kitchen table with the bakery box and the honest eyes and the word threatening hanging in the air between us, about all the ways a life can shift when you stop absorbing what is done to you and start responding to it. I picked up my notebook. I wrote for 45 minutes without stopping. When I put the pen down, I looked at what I had written, and I thought Dr. Marsh is going to have a lot to say about this. I smiled, and then my phone rang. Not Daniel, Not Beverly, not Patricia. A number I didn't recognize. Local area code, I answered. Is this Margaret Collins? A woman's voice. Professional. Measured. It is. Mrs. Collins, my name is Sharon Adley. I'm a producer with Charleston Stories. We're a local podcast and video series that covers personal narratives of people in the Low Country. We're doing a series this fall called Second Chapter Stories of People Who Reinvented Their Lives After 60. A brief pause. Your friend Beverly Cole mentioned your name as someone we should speak with. She said, and I'm quoting her here, that you had just lived through one of the most important stories she had ever heard. I sat very still. Beverly Cole. Of course it was Beverly Cole. I see, I said. I know this is completely out of the blue, Sharon said, and there is absolutely no pressure. But I wondered if you might be open to a conversation. Just a conversation, no commitment. We could meet for coffee, and I could tell you more about what we do. I thought about the memoir class, about Dr. Marsh's words, the gap between what you see and what you feel is where all the most interesting stories live. I thought about what Beverly had said on the phone 3 weeks ago. It's still there. Your life. I can promise you that. I thought about the river cruise and the reading room and the list on my kitchen table, about croissants and tea and a woman in a blue sweater trying finally to be real. I thought about Robert, who had always said I told the best stories, who had kept every letter. Coffee, I said. When were you thinking? Whenever works for you, Sharon said. We're very flexible. Thursday morning, I said. There's a place on Harrison Street I like. Thursday morning is perfect, she said. Mrs. Collins, I think you're going to have a lot to say. I looked around the reading room, at the books and the chair and the light coming through the window. I might, I said, and after I hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet. I thought about where I had been 1 month ago, standing in the entrance of a beautiful restaurant, reaching for a chair being redirected to a table by the door. Standing there while my son looked at a menu and the word sophisticated rang in the air like a verdict. 1 month. 1 month between that woman and this one. And this one. The one sitting in the reading room she had built for herself, who had stood at her own door and held a line, who had sat across from her daughter-in-law and offered truth instead of pretense, who had signed up for a memoir class and paid a deposit for a river cruise and was about to agree to tell her story on a podcast. This woman was more herself than she had been in years, maybe more herself than she had ever been. Because here is what no one tells you about the worst moments of your life. They don't just take from you, they also clear things out. They come through like a hard freeze in early November that kills what was already dying and leaves the ground ready for something new. I had been stripped of things that needed to go. The false peace, the costly silence, the habit of smallness, the belief that keeping everyone comfortable was the same as keeping everyone loved. All of it was gone. And in its place was something I had not had in a very long time. Space. Space to be exactly who I was. I opened my notebook again. I wrote one line at the top of a clean page. The worst night of my life was also the night I remembered who I was. I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote the next line, and it turned out who I was more than enough. I closed the notebook. I went to make dinner. My own dinner. In my own kitchen. In my own life. And outside through the open window, I could hear the street, the Hernandez kids, a dog somewhere, the sound of a city that had been going on without me while I was busy making myself small, and it sounded for the first time in a long time like something I was actually part of. Not a background, not a waiting room, a life, mine. The Thursday morning coffee with Sharon Adley changed things in ways I did not anticipate. I had told myself it was just a conversation, just coffee, the kind of thing you agree to and then decide about later, with the comfortable distance of a few days between the agreeing and the deciding. I had walked into that place on Harrison Street, expecting to listen politely, say I would think about it and probably decline somewhere around the following Tuesday. That is not what happened. Sharon Adley was a small woman in her early 40s, with close-cropped natural hair and the particular kind of listening that makes you feel for the duration of the conversation like you are the only person in the room. She had a recorder on the table between us, not running just there like a reminder of what we were really doing, and she ordered a plain black coffee, and she asked me one question. Mrs. Collins, what is the one thing you wish someone had told you 10 years ago? I looked at her. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. That generosity without boundaries is not a virtue, I said. It's a slow emergency. Sharon looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "Can I be honest with you? Please." "Beverly told me the outline of your story, the restaurant, the table, your son, the financial untangling, and I thought, okay, that's a strong story. Relatable. Good for the series." She set her cup down. "But sitting here right now listening to you say that one sentence, I think what you have is bigger than a single episode." I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means I'd like to build something around your story specifically. Not just a 15-minute segment, a real extended narrative. Your voice, your words, your experience." She leaned forward slightly. "Because what you just said, that generosity without boundaries, is not a virtue. It's a slow emergency. That is the thing that half the women over 50 in this country need to hear and have never heard said out loud." I sat with that. Half the women over 50 in this country. I thought about all the years I had told myself that my situation was particular, that it was my son, my daughter-in-law, my family, my specific complicated history. I had never once framed it as something that other women, many women everywhere, were also living inside. But of course they were. Of course they were. "How long would this take?" I asked. "We'd do 4 or 5 recorded conversations," Sharon said. "A few hours each spread over a few weeks. I'd do the editing, the production. You'd review everything before it aired." She paused. "I want you to feel safe. This is your story. You control it." I thought about the memoir class, about Dr. Marsh and the 15-minute prompt and Frank the veteran and Gloria with her honest divorce. I thought about how it had felt to read my own words out loud in that room and have people go still. "All right," I said. Sharon blinked. "All right, you'll do it?" "I'll do it," I said, "but I have conditions." She smiled. She reached for her recorder. "Tell me." My first condition was that Amelia's name would not be used. Not her name, not enough identifying detail to make her findable. The story was mine to tell, but I was not in the business of public humiliation. I had no interest in destroying her. I was interested in the truth of the experience, not in targeting a person. Sharon agreed immediately. "Absolutely. Standard practice for us." My second condition was that Daniel's name would not be used either. Same reason. Sharon agreed again. My third condition was that the story would not be framed as a victim narrative. I was not a victim. I had been treated badly, yes. I had been taken advantage of, yes. But the story I wanted to tell was not about what was done to me. It was about what I did next. Sharon put the recorder down. She looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Collins," she said, "I think you might be the best subject I have worked with in 11 years of doing this." I picked up my coffee. "Call me Margaret." The first recording session was the following Monday. Beverly drove me there. She had appointed herself official transportation and moral support, a role she was performing with tremendous enthusiasm. On the way over, she kept patting my arm at red lights and saying things like, "You're going to be wonderful, Maggie, and the world needs to hear this." I told her to keep her eyes on the road. But the truth was sitting in the passenger seat of Beverly's car. On that Monday morning, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not nervousness. I had expected nervousness, and it was almost absent. What I felt was purpose, the particular grounding sense of doing something that matters, something real. The recording session lasted 3 hours. I talked. Sharon asked questions, sometimes simple questions. What did you order that night at the restaurant? What was the walk to the table by the door like? And sometimes questions that caught me off guard, that required me to stop and sit with something before I could answer. At one point she asked, "When you canceled the credit card and the insurance and the phone plan, was there a moment of hesitation? Did any part of you want to call it off?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. About 3:30 in the morning I woke up and I thought, what if this is the end? What if pulling back means losing him for good? I paused. And then I thought, if a relationship only survives because I am funding it, it was never what I thought it was. So the fear of losing it isn't enough reason to keep subsidizing something that was already lost. Sharon was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long did it take you to reach that conclusion?" "About 4 minutes," I said. "And then I went back to sleep." She laughed, and I laughed, and somewhere in that laugh I felt something release that I hadn't known was still held. The sessions continued over the following 3 weeks. Second session, third session, fourth. Each one pulling out different threads, the history with Robert Daniels' childhood, the early years of his marriage to Amelia, the slow accumulation of things I had ignored. Sharon was skillful at finding the connective tissue between things, the places where the past and the present linked up in ways I hadn't consciously seen. During the third session, she asked about Robert. I talked about him for 45 minutes, about the man he was, about his laugh and his stubbornness and his habit of refinishing furniture he found at estate sales, about the chair on the porch, about how he had died in a way that was both sudden and not sudden at all. The way long illness works, you see it coming, and you still aren't ready. He sounds like someone who saw you completely, Sharon said. He did, I said. That was his gift. He never let me disappear. And after he died, I thought about it. After he died, I started disappearing again. Slowly, a little at a time. I think I was so focused on not collapsing that I forgot to keep being visible. I paused. And then Daniel got married, and I redirected all that energy into keeping that relationship alive, into being useful, and somewhere in there I stopped asking whether I was being seen. Until the restaurant, Sharon said. Until the restaurant, I said. She turned off the recorder after that, not for the session to end, just for a moment. Can I tell you something off the record? She said. Go ahead. I have interviewed over 200 people in this job, she said, and the stories I remember, the ones that stay with me, are always the ones where someone hits a wall and chooses themselves instead of going around it. She met my eyes. You hit a wall, and you chose yourself. I looked at her for a moment. I chose myself late, I said. I should have done it years earlier. Maybe, she said, but late is not the same as never. I held that. Late is not the same as never. On my drive home that afternoon, Beverly had errands and I had taken my own car. I said it out loud in the empty vehicle. Late is not the same as never. I said it 3 times the way you do when something is true enough that repetition doesn't diminish it. It was the 3rd weeks of September. The air had finally started to shift, that particular Charleston shift from summer to fall that happens almost without announcement. One morning, you walk outside and something is different in the light, in the angle of it, and you know without being told that the season has turned. I had 6 weeks until the Danube cruise, 6 weeks until I got on a plane for the first time in 4 years and went somewhere entirely new, somewhere. Robert and I had always planned and never gotten to, and did it alone, which was both terrifying and the most alive I had felt thinking about something in years. I was in the middle of making the reading room fully functional. The bookcase had arrived. I had painted one wall a warm sage green that Beverly called deeply, whatever that meant, when Daniel knocked on the door one evening. He had been coming by every week. Not long visits, not dramatic ones. The kind of visits that are about showing up more than saying anything. He would bring coffee sometimes, or occasionally food from a place we both liked. We would sit on the porch or in the kitchen and talk about ordinary things, the memoir class, his work, the cruise preparations. Sometimes his sessions with the counselor he had started seeing individually separate from the couple's work he and Amelia were doing. This time he looked different when I opened the door. Not upset, not nervous, something else, something I couldn't quite read yet. "Can we sit inside?" he said. "I have something to tell you." I stepped back, let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. He put both hands around his coffee cup, which is what he does when he is holding something he isn't sure how to carry. "Amelia and I had a session yesterday," he said, "with the counselor. How did it go?" "She said something to Amelia. The counselor did." He looked up. "She asked Amelia to think about what she was most afraid of in life. Not in the marriage, not about us in life. What is the thing you are most fundamentally afraid of?" I waited. And Amelia said, he stopped. His jaw worked. She said she was afraid of being invisible, of being ordinary, of being someone that no one notices or remembers. He looked at me. And the counselor said, "Do you know what she said? Tell me." She said, "Where did you learn that ordinary was something to be afraid of?" And Amelia, she started crying, really crying. And she said she didn't know. She had always just known it, like it was in her before she could remember. The kitchen was very quiet. I thought about Amelia at the restaurant in the red dress, the diamonds, the grand gestures, the sweeping stories, the way she had filled the table with presents while I was redirected to the margins, the performance of sophistication, the curated image of a life, all of it underneath a terrified woman trying not to be invisible. I thought about how I had spent 3 years feeling invisible to her, and she had been spending those same 3 years desperately afraid of becoming what she had made me. That is the thing about fear. It travels. It lands on other people. It becomes the very thing it is running from. What did she do after the session? I said. She sat in the car for 20 minutes, Daniel said. And then she called her mother. He paused. Not to talk about the session, just to talk. She and her mother hadn't really talked in years. She said they talked for almost 2 hours. I thought about Patricia, about the phone call on a Tuesday morning, about a woman who had built a version of her daughter in her mind and accepted it without examining it, and who had, after one restaurant dinner and a conversation with her husband on the way to the hotel, begun to question that version. There's something else, Daniel said. His hands tightened around the coffee cup. She wants to do something for you, he said. Amelia does. She doesn't know if you'll want it. She asked me to ask you first. What is it? She wants to write you a letter. He met my eyes. Not a text, not a conversation. A real letter, handwritten. She said there are things she needs to say that she can't get right when she's talking to you because she gets nervous and it comes out wrong, but she thinks she can write them. He paused. She asked if you would be willing to receive it. I sat for a moment. A handwritten letter. In 30 years of knowing difficult people and navigating difficult things, I had never had anyone ask my permission to write me a letter. It was such a small thing, such a careful, specific, unusually humble thing. Yes, I said, I'll receive it. Daniel exhaled. Okay, good. He nodded. Good. We were quiet for a moment. Daniel, I said, how are you, not you and Amelia, you? He looked slightly startled by the question, which told me everything about how rarely someone had asked it in a while. He stopped. I'm figuring it out. The counselor, my own sessions. They're harder than I expected. It turns out I have a lot of things I built around keeping people comfortable. Strategies for managing situations, instead of actually addressing them. He smiled slightly without humor. Apparently I have been doing that since I was about 12. You were keeping peace between your father and me sometimes, I said. When his temper was short toward the end. You were very young to be carrying that. He looked at me. You noticed. I noticed. I said. I should have said something. I should have told you that wasn't your job. He was quiet. I'm sorry I didn't, I said. Something moved through his face, something old. Mom, you were dealing with... I know what I was dealing with, I said. And I also know that a 12-year-old boy should not be the family diplomat. That was on the adults. That was on me. He looked down at his cup. I think, he said slowly, I married someone who needed managing. I think I was comfortable with that because it was familiar. He paused. And I think I managed you the same way, put you in the category of someone I could rely on to absorb things without pushing back. You could rely on that, I said, until you couldn't. Until the restaurant, he said. Until the restaurant, I said. He nodded. I keep thinking, he said, about what would have happened if you hadn't left that night, if you had just sat at that table by the door and said nothing, and come home and absorbed it like you always had. He looked up. We would all still be doing the same thing. Me, Amelia, you, just the same thing, for years. Yes, I said, we would. You leaving was the thing that broke it open. I didn't leave to break anything open, I said. I left because I had no other choice that I could live with. I know, he said, but it did. It broke everything open. And as hard as the last month has been... He stopped, looked around my kitchen, at the new plant on the counter, at the open doorway to the back hallway where the reading room was taking shape. You look different, Mom. You look like yourself. I am myself, I said. It turns out she was here the whole time. He smiled, a real one. The one I had known since he was 3 weeks old, and at first appeared tentative and perfect in his sleep. Can I see the reading room, he said. Come on, I said. I showed him the reading room. He stood in the doorway and looked at the sage green wall and the bookcase and the chair from the consignment shop and the books on the windowsill, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, This looks like something Dad would have built for you. I had not thought of it that way, but the moment he said it, I knew it was true. Yeah, I said. I think it does. He turned and looked at me. He'd be proud of you. I know, I said. I've been thinking that for about a month. The letter arrived 11 days later. I knew what it was the moment I saw it in the mailbox. A cream-colored envelope, handwritten address, no return name, but Amelia's handwriting, which I recognized from the occasional birthday cards she had sent over the years. Small, precise script. The kind of handwriting that takes effort. I took it inside. I sat in the reading room chair. I held it for a while before I opened it. There is something about a handwritten letter that a text or an email cannot replicate. The weight of it. The knowledge that someone sat down in the physical world with a pen and paper and chose each word slowly enough to write it by hand. There is no editing in a handwritten letter, not really. There is only deciding to keep going or start over. And starting over means throwing away what you already wrote, which means losing it, which means committing to what you put down. A handwritten letter is commitment in a way that typing is not. I opened the envelope carefully. 3 pages, both sides, cream paper, the same small, precise script. I will not share everything she wrote. Some of it is hers. But I will tell you this, she named things, specific things. Not the restaurant alone, she went back further. She named the first time she had made me feel unwelcome in Daniel's home, the time she had made a comment about my car that I had pretended not to hear. The birthday dinner she had arranged without consulting me at a restaurant she knew was not accessible for my knees and had not changed when I quietly mentioned the stairs. Small things, accumulated things. She had been holding that list. She had catalogued her own unkindnesses and carried them, and instead of making her feel guilty, the carrying had made her harder. Because that is what unacknowledged guilt does, it hardens. It builds a wall between you and the thing you did, and eventually you are defending the wall instead of examining what is behind it. She had taken the wall down. It took 3 pages. At the end she wrote, "I do not expect forgiveness. I do not think I have earned it yet. What I am asking for is the chance to earn it." Not the easy kind of chance where you simply decide to believe me, the real kind where I prove it over time through how I act. I think you deserve that kind of proof, and I think I need to give it. I sat in the reading room for a long time after I finished reading. Outside, the street sounds carried through the window I had cracked open. The Hernandez kids, someone's radio, the particular sound of a Charleston afternoon in late September, warm still, but with the edge of fall in it. I read the letter twice more. Then I went to my desk. I had moved Robert's old desk into the reading room, which felt right, which felt like the right use for it, and I took out paper. I wrote back. Not 3 pages, 1 page, but a full one. I told her I had received the letter. I told her it was the most honest thing she had given me. I told her I was not in a position to offer full forgiveness yet, because I had learned the hard way that offered too quickly forgiveness becomes just another form of pretending. I told her that what I could offer was this: I would stop holding the wall between us. I would stop anticipating the next disappointment. I would approach whatever came next without the accumulated weight of everything that had come before. A clean table, I wrote. Not a clean slate, that phrase implies nothing happened. A clean table, same room, new arrangement. Let's see what we can put on it. I signed it Margaret, not Mom, not yet, but not Mrs. Collins either. Margaret, a person, her own person. Meeting another person halfway across a table they were both going to have to build. I put it in an envelope. I addressed it by hand. I walked it to the mailbox myself. Standing at the mailbox, I thought about what Beverly had said on the porch weeks ago after one of our long evenings. You know what the bravest thing is, Maggie? Not the big dramatic stuff. The bravest thing is choosing to stay open when every reason in the world is telling you to close. I dropped the letter in. I walked back to my house. 4 days before the cruise, Daniel and Amelia came to dinner. Together, at my kitchen table. I had cooked not because I was trying to impress anyone, not as a performance, but because cooking in my own kitchen for people I was genuinely inviting was something I had missed. I made the things I made well. Shrimp and grits, because it was Charleston, and it was October, and because it was the one meal Robert had requested for every birthday he ever had. They arrived together, which was itself something together, the same car, a united thing. Amelia brought flowers from the garden shop on Rutledge. Real flowers, loose-stemmed, the kind that have dirt still on their roots. I put them in the blue vase that sat on the windowsill above my kitchen sink. We sat down. Dinner was not perfect. It was not a movie reconciliation with all the right words at the right moments. There were pauses that went on a beat too long. There was a moment when Amelia reached for her water glass and knocked over the salt shaker, and the 3 of us sat for half a second in the small awkwardness of it before I righted it and said simply, "There we go," and something released in the room. We talked about the cruise. I had my itinerary printed, and Daniel asked about every port. We talked about Beverly's decision to finally get a dog, which had everyone in the neighborhood mildly alarmed. We talked about Daniel's work, which was going well. We talked about Amelia's job. She worked in marketing, something I had never fully understood, but she explained a campaign she was working on with genuine enthusiasm, and I found myself interested in a way I never had been before. Because she was actually talking to me, not managing me. There is a profound difference. At the end of the meal, while I was clearing the plates, Amelia stood and said, "Let me help." I handed her a plate. We stood side by side at the sink. She washed. I dried. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, without looking up from the water, "Thank you for writing back." "I meant what I said," I told her. "I know." She paused. "The clean table thing." A small sound, almost a laugh. "I've been thinking about that, what I want to put on it." "What do you want to put on it?" She thought about it. "Something real," she said finally. "I want to put something real on it, for once." I dried the plate in my hands. "Then that's a good start," I said. She handed me another plate. We kept going. The water ran. Daniel said something from the kitchen table about Beverly's future dog, some concern about whether Beverly had thought through the logistics, and Amelia and I both responded at the same moment. She said, "Beverly will manage," and I said Beverly never thinks through logistics, and it actually made both of us laugh, properly laugh, at the same time, the first time. Daniel looked up from the table with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. He looked stunned and grateful, and younger than he had looked in years, and he said, "Did you two just agree on something?" "Don't make it weird," Amelia said. "I'm not making it weird, You're making it weird," I said. He put his hands up. "I'll be quiet." Amelia caught my eye. She was smiling. Not the managed performance smile I had seen at 100 family occasions. The real one, the one that started at the eyes first. I smiled back. "Something small, I know." In the scale of everything that had happened, the restaurant, the table by the door, the canceled cards and the slammed phone and the locked locks and the letters, and the long, difficult, careful rebuilding a smile over a sink full of dishes while washing up after shrimp and grits is not the climax of anything. But here is what I know about small things at 67, having lived through more of them than I can count. Small things are how the big things actually happen. Change does not come in one dramatic gesture. It comes in 100 ordinary moments, each one chosen, each one small, each one building on the last, until one day you look up and the world is different than it was. A letter in a cream envelope, a clean table, flowers from the garden shop on Rutledge, salt spilled and righted, plates washed and dried and handed person to person in a kitchen that had been 1 month ago the loneliest place I knew. Small things, all of them chosen. All of them real. 3 days later, I packed my suitcase. I had packed and repacked it twice already, which Beverly said was completely reasonable, and which Dr. Marsh, when I mentioned it in class, said was anxiety expressing itself as productivity, which was accurate and also funny, and also something I wrote down. I packed the navy dress, the pearl necklace, the notebooks, 3 of them blank, for 17 days on the Danube, the photograph of Robert that lived on my nightstand, the one from our trip to Savannah in 1998, where he was laughing at something off camera, and the light was doing something extraordinary with his hair. I packed the photograph carefully between 2 sweaters so it would not bend. I was going where we had always planned to go, not the way we had planned, but I was going. That too felt like something. That too felt like choosing. The night before I left, I sat in the reading room in my chair, and I looked at the sage green wall and the bookcase full of books, and the desk that had been Robert's, and the windowsill with the small collection of things that mattered. I thought about the woman who had stood in front of a restaurant mirror 6 weeks ago in a dark blue dress and told herself tonight will be different. She had been right. She just hadn't known how. She had thought different meant welcome, meant belonging, meant being seen by the people who were supposed to see her. What different actually meant was this the beginning of the rest of her life, which started not in the restaurant, not at the table by the door, but in the parking lot in the cool Charleston air looking up for stars and finding 4. The plane lifted off at 6:47 in the morning, and I watched Charleston shrink below me, the rivers, the peninsula, the particular curve of the coastline that I had lived beside for most of my adult life, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not sadness, not the bittersweet ache of leaving I had anticipated. Something cleaner than that. Something that felt, if I am being precise, like exhaling after holding your breath for a very long time without realizing you were holding it. I was going to Budapest. By myself. At 67 years old, 6 weeks after the worst night of my life, I was sitting in a window seat at 30,000 feet with 3 blank notebooks in my carry-on bag and a photograph of Robert tucked between 2 sweaters, and I was going to the place we had always planned to go. I ordered tea when the flight attendant came, English breakfast, and I held the cup in both hands and looked out at the clouds, and I thought, Robert, I made it. I actually made it. I did not cry, but it was close. The cruise began in Budapest on a Tuesday morning. There were 42 passengers on the ship, mostly couples, which I had prepared myself for the particular sting of being the only solo traveler at a table for 2, but the ship's staff had clearly done this before. They seated solo travelers together at meals, not in a pitying way, but in the matter-of-fact way of people who understand that strangers sharing a table can become something unexpected. The woman seated across from me at my first dinner on the ship was named Harriet. Harriet Burke from Nashville, Tennessee, 71 years old, recently retired cardiac nurse with a laugh that could be heard from 2 tables away and opinions about everything delivered without apology. She looked at me across the table, introduced herself in exactly 4 words. Harriet Burke, Nashville, retired, and then said, "You look like someone who just survived something." I stared at her. "I do," I said. "You have the look," she said. "I've had it myself. It's not a bad look, actually. It means you came out the other side." I considered deflecting. I considered the polite, non-committal response that would keep things surface level and easy. And then I thought, I am on a river in Hungary. I am 67 years old. I have earned the right to be honest with strangers. "I did survive something," I said. "Pretty recently, actually." Harriet pointed her fork at me. "Tell me." So I told her. Not all of it. Not 3 hours of recorded sessions with Sharon, not the letters and the locks and the $19,000 on a laptop screen, but the shape of it. The restaurant, the table by the door, my son's silence, what I did afterward. I told it the way you tell things to strangers on ships, which is faster and more honestly than you tell things to people who know you, because there is nothing at stake. Harriet listened without interrupting, which told me she had been a good nurse. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long were you paying their bills?" 3 years. "And how long before you did something about it?" 3 years, I said. She nodded. "I paid my ex-husband's gambling debts for 4 years before I did something about it." She said it flatly, without self-pity. "So I'm not here to judge the timeline. I'm just noting that we both got there." "We did," I said. "What made you do it?" she said. "Pull back, cut the cord. What was the actual moment?" I thought about it. "She pointed me to a table by the door," I said, "and my son looked at his menu." Harriet set her fork down. "The menu," she said. "The menu." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I think? I think it's never the big thing. It's always the menu. It's always the one small, ordinary act of indifference that finally makes it real." I looked at her. I thought about that for the rest of the dinner, and honestly for much of the rest of the cruise. It's always the menu, not the years, not the money, not the slow accumulation of being managed and minimized and pointed to the margins. It was the specific image of my son's eyes dropping to a laminated page while his wife redirected me to a table by the door. That specific, ordinary, devastating act of choosing not to see. That was the moment. That was what broke it open. Harriet and I ate dinner together every night for 17 days. She was without question one of the most remarkable people I had ever met. She had raised 3 kids alone after her divorce. She had put herself through nursing school at 38. She had worked cardiac ICU for 20 years and watched people face the last moments of their lives with every possible combination of peace and regret. She had opinions about everything from hospital administration to the proper way to make cornbread, and she shared them freely, and she made me laugh every single day in a way I had forgotten I was capable of. On the 4th day of the cruise, somewhere on the Danube between Bratislava and Vienna, she asked me about Robert. I told her about him for 2 hours. And here is what I found telling Robert's story to someone who had never known him. He came back to me, not in the grief-soaked way that missing someone usually goes, the ache and the absence. He came back in the telling, in remembering the way he laughed, the way he worked with his hands, the way he had once told me that I told the best stories he had ever heard, and that the world would be smaller without my voice in it. I had forgotten that he said that. I had forgotten in the years of being useful and available and quietly subsiding into the background of other people's lives that there was a man who had known me completely and had considered my voice something the world needed. I wrote that down in one of the blank notebooks that night. Robert said the world would be smaller without my voice in it. He was not wrong, and I spent 3 years making myself smaller anyway. That ends here on a river in October, with a new friend and 3 notebooks, and the autumn colors exactly as I imagined them. The autumn colors were in fact exactly as I had imagined them. Better, actually. On the 7th day, we docked in Vienna for a full day. I walked for 4 hours through a city I had never seen, and I was not lonely. This surprised me, the not loneliness. I had expected that the beauty of the place would make the absence of Robert unbearable. But what I found instead was that he was there in the way that people who have loved you completely are always there, folded into the way you see things. I looked at a cathedral and thought Robert would have said something about the engineering. I ate a piece of soccer tort in a cafe and thought Robert would have eaten 3 of these and pretended he hadn't. I sat on a bench in a park and watched children throw bread to ducks in a pond, and I thought Robert would have named the ducks. He always named things. I took photographs of all of it. That evening, back on the ship, I called Daniel. The time difference was significant, but he had told me to call whenever that he would answer, and he did on the 3rd ring, his voice slightly foggy with early morning but alert immediately when he heard me. "Mom, how is it?" "Daniel," I said, "it's extraordinary. Tell me." So I told him. The cathedral, the cafe, the soccer tort, the ducks. And as I talked, I heard something in his voice that I had not heard in a long time. Genuine delight. The specific pleasure of a child hearing that their parent is happy. Not relieved that I wasn't causing a problem, not managing my emotions from a distance, genuinely, purely glad. "Mom," he said when I finished, "I am so glad you went." "So am I," said. A pause. "Dad would have loved this," he said. "He would have named the ducks," I said. Daniel laughed. "A real one, the one from before." "He absolutely would have," he said. "He would have given them all full names, first and last." "Gerald and Patricia," I said. A beat of silence. Then Daniel burst out laughing, really laughing, the kind that takes over, the kind you can't stop, and I was laughing too. There on a ship on the Danube with Vienna behind me, and the dark water moving and my son's voice in my ear, both of us laughing at a joke that was also not entirely a joke, the way the best ones always are. When we settled, he said, "How are you really?" "Really," I held the phone. "I feel like myself. I feel like someone who had forgotten who she was and has been slowly remembering." "I like that person," he said. "I always liked that person. I just forgot to show it." "I know," I said. "We both forgot some things. We're remembering now." "Yeah," he said quietly. "We are." Before I hung up, he said, "Amelia wanted me to tell you something." "What?" "She started a journal," he said. "She said she wanted you to know that. She's writing things down. She said it's helping." I thought about Amelia. About the woman in the blue sweater with the bakery box and the 3-page letter in the cream envelope. About therapeutics she needed and what she was trying to build toward. About the clean table. "Tell her I'm glad," I said. "I will. Good night, Daniel." "Good morning, Mom." I hung up. I stood on the deck of the ship and looked at the water and felt the cool October air on my face and thought about all of it at once. The restaurant and the table and the menu and the credit card and the locks and the porch and the memoir class and Beverly and Sharon and the podcast and the reading room and the letter and the dinner with shrimp and grits and the smile over the sink and the airplane and the cathedral and the ducks. All of it had happened. All of it was real. And here I was, still standing, more than standing. The podcast episode aired while I was on the ship. Sharon had told me the date, and I had half forgotten it in the business of living, and then Harriet knocked on my cabin door at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday and said without preamble, "Your friend Beverly sent me a link. She has my email because I gave it to her because she seems like someone who finds out everything eventually, and I decided to cooperate. Your podcast is out. We're listening to it." We sat in the ship's small lounge with my phone between us, and we listened. I had heard the recordings during the editing process. I had approved them. I had known what Sharon had built from our conversations. But hearing it played back, my own voice, unhurried, telling the truth about my own life, was different from knowing what it contained. I sounded, I thought, like someone who had lived something real, not a victim, not a hero, Just a woman who had made choices, had unmade choices, and had eventually found her way back to herself. When it ended, Harriet was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know that's going to matter to a lot of people." "I hope so," I said. "It's going to matter to women who have been sitting at their own table by the door for years," she said, "who have been paying and giving and absorbing and waiting for it to be noticed. It's going to hit them right in the chest." I thought about that. About the half the women over 50 in this country that Sharon had mentioned in the coffee shop. About all the versions of that restaurant in all the different lives. "I'm not special," I said. "That's not modesty. I mean it literally. What happened to me is not unusual. The specific version is mine, but the shape of it, the giving until you disappear, the silence that costs more than the words, that's not uncommon." "No," Harriet said. "It's not." She looked at me. "That's exactly why it matters." My phone connected to the ship's Wi-Fi started lighting up. Beverly first, naturally. A string of messages that were mostly exclamation points, and one long paragraph that ended with, "I told you the world needed to hear this, Maggie, I told you." Then Dr. Marsh from the memoir class, a short and precise message. "Your instinct for the telling detail is remarkable." The menu. Perfect. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Gloria from the memoir class, who had gotten my number from Beverly, because, as she put it, Beverly gives out numbers like they're recipes. Then Sharon herself, Margaret. The response is extraordinary. People are writing in. Women are writing in. "I need to talk to you when you're back. I think we have something much bigger here." And then at the bottom of all of them, a message from Daniel. Just 3 words. "Mom, you're incredible." I held the phone for a long time. I thought about the woman who had stood in front of a mirror 6 weeks ago in a dark blue dress and whispered, "Tonight will be different." I thought about how she had been right in every way that mattered, and wrong in every way she had expected. I thought about the table by the door, and the bowl of soup, and the cold draft from the entrance, and the young waiter with the kind eyes and the cash I had counted out, and the 4 stars I had found in the parking lot. I thought about what I had written in the notebook on the 4th night of the cruise. That ends here on a river in October. It had ended there, and something else had begun. The cruise finished on a Saturday in Amsterdam. Harriet and I hugged at the gangway for a long time, the kind of hug that acknowledges the shorthand of what 2 people have built in a short time, the particular compressed intimacy of strangers who became necessary to each other. "Nashville," she said. "Come visit. I make the best cornbread you will ever eat, and I am not remotely modest about it." "I believe you," I said. "You'll come." "I'll come," I said. She hugged me once more. Then she walked away down the gangway with her rolling suitcase, and she turned once and waved, and I waved back. I flew home on a Sunday. Beverly picked me up from the airport. She was waiting at arrivals with a handwritten sign that said, "Margaret Collins, World Traveler," which made me laugh and made the people around her smile, and she hugged me so hard I heard my own spine pop. "How was it?" she said immediately, before we had even fully let go. "Beverly," I said, "I will tell you everything, every detail, but first I need you to know something." "What?" "You were right," I said, "about all of it, the class, the cruise, the podcast. You were right." She pulled back and looked at me with the expression of someone trying very hard not to say "I told you so" and not fully succeeding. "I know," she said. "Don't gloat." "I'm not gloating," she said. "I'm just standing here being right." I linked my arm through hers. We walked to the car. The week after I got back, Daniel and Amelia came to dinner again. This time, Amelia brought dessert, a sweet potato pie from the same bakery on King Street, because she had asked Beverly for the actual recipe. And Beverly, in a move I found both audacious and perfect, had given her one with a missing ingredient, and then texted me separately to warn me. I told Amelia gently when she arrived, before she could wonder why it tasted slightly off, and she stared at me for a moment, and then laughed that real laugh, the I first one, and said, "She didn't." "She absolutely did," I said. "Should I be offended?" I considered it. "Beverly tests people," I said. "If she gave you the wrong recipe, it means she's paying attention to you. It means you matter enough to mess with." Amelia blinked. She paused. "That's actually kind of touching, in a strange way." "Beverly is kind in strange ways," I said. "You'll get used to it." She looked at me for a moment. Something passed between us, not fully resolved, not perfectly healed, but real. Something that was actually being built, one careful choice at a time on the clean table we had both agreed to sit at. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "So am I." We went inside. The dinner was easy in a way that was still slightly surprising to me. Daniel talked too much about the cruise because he was proud of me and couldn't help it. Amelia asked about Harriet and seemed genuinely charmed by the description. We ate well. We stayed at the table for 2 hours, talking about nothing particularly consequential, which is, I have learned the most consequential thing of all. When they left, Amelia paused at the door. "Margaret," she said. I waited. "The clean table," she said. "I've been thinking about what to put on it." She met my eyes. "I think I want to start by just showing up, just being here, not managing things or making things look a certain way, just showing up as whoever I actually am and seeing if that's enough." I looked at her. "Amelia," I said, "that is the only thing that has ever been enough." She nodded, and the composure slipped for just a moment. I saw it, the real face underneath the one that was afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being invisible, afraid of being seen without the armor. And then she straightened and she gave me a real smile, and she walked to the car where Daniel was waiting. I closed the door. I stood in my front hall for a moment, then I walked to the reading room. I sat in my chair. I opened the notebook, the third one, the one I had started on the ship, and I looked at what I had written over 17 days on the Danube. Pages and pages in my own hand, not polished, not ready for anything. Just the truth of what I had lived set down in the way I had always been able to set things down, the way Robert had always said was a gift. I turned to a blank page near the end. I picked up the pen. I wrote one paragraph, not for the podcast, not for the memoir class, not for Sharon or Dr. Marsh or Beverly or anyone else, just for me. For the woman who had stood at a restaurant mirror and whispered, "Tonight will be different," and had no idea how right she was. I wrote, "I am 67 years old, and I am more myself than I have ever been. I have learned that love without boundaries is not love. It is an arrangement that benefits one party and erodes the other. I have learned that silence is a choice, and I have learned to make different ones. I have learned that the worst night of your life can also be the first night of a better one if you are willing to walk out the door and look up. I have learned that you can lose a version of your life and find the actual one waiting underneath. And I have learned finally, completely, without reservation, that the table you build for yourself with your own hands in your own time is the one where you are always welcome, always at the head, always home." I put the pen down. I closed the notebook. Outside, the street was doing what it always did, the Hernandez kids, someone's radio, a dog, the sound of ordinary life continuing its ordinary business, and it sounded as it had been sounding for weeks now, like something I was fully part of. My cardinal was in the bird bath. I could see it from the reading room window. I watched it for a while. Just that. Just a bird in a bird bath on a Wednesday evening, ruffling its feathers in the water, completely certain of its place in the world. I had pointed me to a table by the door. She had meant it as a verdict. It turned out to be a door, and I had walked through it. And on the other side was exactly this: my chair, my room, my notebooks, my life. The cardinal in the bird bath. Beverly with her wrong recipes and her right instincts. Daniel finding his way back. Amelia finding her way forward. Harriet in Nashville with her cornbread and her extraordinary laugh. A river in October, and a photograph of Robert between 2 sweaters and 4 stars, visible from a parking lot in downtown Charleston, if you know where to look. This was my table. I had built it myself. And every single person sitting at it had earned their seat, including me, especially me.